Do you want to know the story behind this painting? Octavia swirled her glasses of brandy, listening to the pleasant tinkle of the ice cubes. She didn't drink brandy because she liked it. She certainly didn't drink for the taste or dramatic appeal. Olivia drank brandy because it was what he drank. There had been a time a reckless schoolgirl, 200 bits, big dreams of some fantasy music school in Canterlot, in which she lacked of any individuality. Octavia just became part of the others, mirroring behaviors both vengeant and dangerous. That was how it all started. It was how she began her story, as the carefree schoolgirl who thought she knew everything. The artist, Iron Brush, had been very kind to her. He approached her at the cafe, made some ideal remark about her school outfit. Octavia, young and foolish, mistook his interest for something innocent. She was even flattered by it, dazzled by his attention. Octavia had asked him to sit down, and she even paid for his coffee and that little tray of sandwiches they shared, 20 bits. Iron Brush explained that he was searching for a model, his old one, or so he said. He had a runoff with someone idealistic young artist in Manhattan. He lamented for the fall of the modern art, and how a few ponies appreciated the classics and the hard work that went into his creations. He seemed to generally vulnerable in that moment, causing Octavia's heart to ache as she describes his troubles. "Would you like to be my new model?" he asked. Dazzled by his offer and his kind words, Octavia said she'd think about it. She really made up her mind, but she didn't want to come off as desperate. She had dreams bigger than her small town. That fancy music school in Canterlot, the one attended by all the greats throughout Equestria's colorful history. Her parents refused to pay for it, refused to be able to what really considered a silly dream. 200 bits for some music school? Preposterous. Iron Brush offered her more. He'd paid for her all of her school-related expenses, he told her. He'd let her stay at his second house in Canterlot while she attended school. He even wrote a letter of the recommendation to ensure that she was accepted. Octavia, trusting, hopeful, desperate, accepted. It was just modeling, she told herself. It was just posing. Iron Brush said she was beautiful, absolute perfection that must be preserved on canvas. She loved the way his eyes lit up when he looked at her. The way he studied her was like she was a masterpiece. No pony had ever looked at her like that before. She moved on to Iron Brush's house a few days later. She felt no sadness, no guilt, no trepidation. She just felt liberated, freed from her crushing expectations of her family and the grueling work she endured for her benefit of her demanding father. Octavia was going somewhere, and she was going to be admired, pampered, permitted to practice with her cello as much as she liked. A secluded house in the middle of nowhere, away from the prying ears and eyes, a brand new life with a unicorn who appreciated her talent and her beauty. The first few days were wonderful. Octavia awakened by every morning to a lovely home-cooked breakfast. She wandered around the beautiful, enormous garden for hours. She played the cello for her heart's content. Iron Brush had not yet begun to paint her. He said that he needed to be better to understand her beauty, to completely immerse herself in her essence. He allowed her all the freedom she wanted. In exchange, he'd only ask for she not complain about him following her with a sketch pad. On the 7th day, Iron Brush announced that he was ready. Masterpiece he called his masterpiece before it was even finished. It was simply an image in his head, but he was certain, he assured Octavia. This was going to be set the art world in a blaze. This would be painting that would change the world. But at first he needed something from her. It was a small thing, or so he told her, more of a token of her devotion to his artistic vision than anything else. He needed it, he said. It was the key to the entire process, the one component that sets him apart from all those mediocre artists who had gotten famous on a whim. But Iron Brush was a real artist. He understood art. He understood the true depth that went into a perfect painting. He was willing to take the risks, to be bold, to challenge the art world with his vision. He told Octavia all this. His voice was rising and became entraced by his own passionate speech. "We must give in everything to our art," he said. Iron Brush said he needed a few locks of Octavia's mane, just enough to create a high-quality durable brush, with that to paint his masterpiece. He already gotten a few from his previous models, but their beauty was nothing compared to Octavia's radiance. He needed something, and some pony, some pure. Most of those models were corrupted, he told her. They were rotten, their souls twisted by posh Canterlot society or egotistical Manhattan society. But Octavia, a young mare from a small town, had not yet been warped. The next day, Octavia presented him with a jar containing about a sizable chunk of her mane. She fought in the only way a pony of her age could. That was a worthy sacrifice. He was offering to preserve her beauty for generations to come, to write her the most perfect future. What more could Octavia ask for? Having been on a leash for her entire life, always having lacked the ability to control her own destiny? Iron Brush didn't need her to pose. He said that he would do it on his own, even without her physically in front of him. He only needed to her essence, the rawness of the image in his head. Octavia was as much of a muse as a model. Once captured, her beauty was never going to leave Iron Brush's mind. "You're going to love it," he assured her. She didn't see him during those first few days. She heard the model's melodies he hummed, even though the swish of the brush if he pressed her ear to the door. But Octavia herself was left to wander, trotting through the empty halls with the increasing feeling of loneliness. If there had been other servants, they'd left Iron Brush to his solitary existence a long time ago. He seemed content with his own isolation. But Octavia wasn't used to it. She longed for the busy streets, the cafes, the movie theater. A part of her even longed for the boring school that she had once attended. Eventually, Iron Brush emerged from his studio, shutting down and locking the door behind him. He'd seemed quite happy only a few days ago, but now he looked delicately sour. Oh, painting, he thought. There was going to be a masterpiece. He had taken a chunk of her mane, and he had created the most beautiful and elegant brush, the handle carved from the finest wood of Equestria. Truly, he created the purest instrument of art known to pony kind. Even as he put it on canvas, he was satisfied. Iron Brush was now watched the colors flowed from the image that came together practically independent of him. But then it all fell apart. No, it wasn't the masterpiece he envisioned. This wasn't the beautiful pony who had come to stay with him. His mockery of a painting only captured 5% of her beauty, perhaps less. It was otherworldly and ghoulish representation of the true self, a cruel joke, hideous and depictive. Iron Brush asked for something more. He needed to be his masterpiece, to give into his victorious return of the art world. He knew he could do it. He knew Octavia's beauty was unraveled, but he needed more. Iron Brush had touched the surface of her beauty, but hadn't gone deep enough to truly immerse himself. He took the blood she gave him and mixed it into the paint, true essence of Octavia, her beauty to settle. The colors pulsed and bubbled with it. Octavia lay in bed afterwards, staring up at the ceiling. She no longer knew what to think. She still felt it, even through the sensation it had long since left her. The prick of a knife, the cold blade against her fur. At the time she felt violated by it, but the way she couldn't put it into 2 words. Octavia had seen the redness leak from her, droplets falling in from the strange bowl Iron Brush had provided her. Her eyes, confused and somewhat fearful, had met his manic, blissful. In that moment, she had briefly wondered why himself had to take so much pleasure in hurting her. Why didn't he not hesitate for a second? Why didn't he show remorse? But then Octavia was hoisted onto his back and carried to bed. He loomed over her, his horn glowing as he healed her as best as he could. The warmth from the spell washed away all else, although for only a moment. She didn't come out of her room for 2 days. She ate what little food she had stashed in her bedroom, mostly pastries she had hidden away. Iron Brush gave her food she desired, another luxury Octavia had been deprived of at home. He had been taking care of her, providing her with everything she wanted and needed. Octavia felt that she could be grateful, but every time she started to rebook herself, she again remembered the cold blade pressed against her fur, took a glee in his eyes, and he coaxed the redness from her. Octavia no longer listened to the door of his studio. She no longer slept soundly. Her nightmares were terrible, full of screaming faces and ghoulish art galleries, but the feelings were even worse than the images. A brief stabbing pain at her side, a prick that reminded her of the knife, an agonizing tug on her mane, and the ripping and tear of flesh. Octavia began to notice patches of her fur and mane are missing. The stress she fought, the nightmares, the isolation, escalating dread, it was too much for her. Her body was turning against her. Octavia was slowly falling apart, as if she had become a corpse. She could feel herself rotting from the inside out. Her dreams bled into a waking world. Octavia could hardly distinguish between the endless hallways in her dreams and the ones in their house. She had come across the paintings Iron Brush had abandoned in various unused rooms. Every time she found one on, she swore the features of twisted and warped right before her eyes. But when she looked again, Octavia saw one only of her smiling face. In one of the unused rooms, she found a photo album stuffed into a drawer. Delirious from her lack of sleep, Octavia flipped it open. It had been weeks since she had seen another pony, a single door standing between her and Iron Brush's feverish work. But she didn't want to see him. She ached for this to be over, for Iron Brush to keep his promise. Even though he hadn't said it directly, he had promised her something extra, something she craved from at this point. Freedom from him and his work. The photographs were all of Iron Brush's previous models, although at the time she didn't understand. She only comprehended the rawness of what she was seeing. A rawness so profound, it shook her. She thought it was too numb to be shaken. Octavia's only desire was for a glimpse of the outside world, a reminder of that ponies beside Iron Brush existed. The snapshots of friends and family inside her head weren't enough. She cast them aside, telling none of her whereabouts and burning every possible bridge. But Octavia was not prepared for what she saw in the photo album. Their faces, blurred and warped, as if some pony had smeared them. There was a beauty to it, a surreal sort of wonder to the distorted features. Octavia was struck by it, as if she was looking at a work of art. She closed the photo album and put it back. Octavia didn't want Iron Brush to know she looked, but she had a feeling he'd known even if she didn't tell him. Perhaps he had anticipated this discovery. Iron Brush must have realized she'd become curious, and she'd eventually find out what happened to his former models. But this had caused him no concern. Octavia would wonder, but she would never betray him. She pledged herself as to him, as much like her former models who purity had provided in the deficit. A few days later, Octavia discovered the basement. She had been careful in her exploration, opening every door and giving every room his own fair share of use. He found all the corners and crannies, or so she thought. But although the garden maintained its charm, the house was another story. There was always walls, always doors that couldn't be unlocked. "What's this?" Octavia wondered out loud. She found a key under the sink, one of those big old-fashioned ones from the world basement, dangling from it. But it had been weeks since she had forgotten all about it. There wasn't even a basement, or so she assumed, based on the map in her head. However, this was some kind of house that was fated to have a basement. It was only by pure chance that Octavia stumbled across it on her way to the garden. Octavia had come to accept her fate. She was trapped in this monstrously large house forever, in fear of Iron Brush's wrath if she dared attempt to escape. She was to be his unwilling model until he either got bored of her or he deemed her impure. Octavia had stopped practicing her cello every morning. The music had comforted her, but now it only brought her sorrow. She could no longer image the vast concert halls or wedding receptions. Down in the basement, Octavia found Ironbrush's previous models. He simply left them, cast them aside in the darkness as if they meant nothing. Perhaps they had to run away, seeking a better life than what they had been given. Perhaps they had one been Octavia, sitting alone in the cafe, eating pastries and laminating their lost dreams. When the stranger had approached them, his mouth was full of promises and flattery. They would be reborn within its art. They would be made eternal by the strokes of a brush. The jars were stacked on a large shelf on the back of the room. Perhaps there were more, but Octavia only saw the ones on the shelf. She saw the swirling colors, the way they throbbed and bubbled right before her eyes. Vibrant reds and purples and pinks and yellows and greens. A few idle strands of mane, twisted and tangled within the liquid. They were beyond escape, beyond feeling, beyond a realm of existence. The smell of rotting flesh permeated the room, leaking generosity from the opened neck of each jar. Octavia went back upstairs. She locked the basement behind her, more out of habit than anything else. The door was Ironbrush's studio was open and cracked. Octavia had taken a note of this earlier, but she had ignored it. There was nothing for her in there. Nothing except a stallion who shunned her image a long time ago. Despite his supposed fascination with her, he had explicitly barred her, but Octavia sensed this as his need to keep the painting away from her curious eyes. He wanted her to be the first to see it. Perhaps he meant her to be the only one to see it. Octavia pushed the door open. She didn't want to see the painting. Over those weeks, she had fallen off of the love of her image. She could barely stand to look in the mirror, let alone see a painting of herself. The metallic rendering from form of her paint would even be worse than her reflection. But she went inside, drawn into the room that once had been forbidden. Ironbrush was laying on the floor of his studio. He laid there amidst of his mess of his own creation. He seemed to have knocked over several bottles of paint, spilling their contents all over the floor. The paint within the bottles had an odd smell, a strong, sickly, sweet aroma that reminded Octavia of rotting flesh. A few easels had been upended, and bookshelves had been emptied onto the floor. A vase had been shattered against the wall. Ironbrush lay in the middle of the chaos, his body completely still. He had been still for quite some time, before Octavia found him. Ironbrush had always been a stallion of dramatics, or at least Octavia considered him to be. She was not surprised to find the remains of what appeared to have been a violent outburst over a failed project, but she was quite shocked to find him in the middle of it. Octavia was quite shocked to see the knife, the same one he had bled her with, sticking out of his neck. Octavia's gaze wandered into the easel that remained upright, one more bearing unfinished painting, although she would eventually come to claim as her own, out of some kind of morbid need to preserve this chapter of her life. At that moment she felt nothing but revulsion. Ironbrush had spoken so highly of her and the purity of her image. He said that it was a travesty her beauty was not immortalized by some kind of manner, photographs being too impersonal for his taste, paintings that were much purer from out of the expression, at least in his opinion. The colors breathed, given life by the brush. He had been correct in an aspect. The painting certainly breathed, even its unfinished state, even having failed to capture her beauty as he wanted. Ironbrush had created something that was certain to draw the eye. In its own morbid way, it was a shame that he had a little outburst. Perhaps if he had lived to finish the painting, his hideous creation would have been better expressed, even reverted by the art world, or so he hated on a daily basis. As it was, Ironbrush had splattered his own soul into the canvas. He painted over Octavia's beauty, replacing whatever he had mistaken purity for his own warped version of it. That was how Octavia explained the utter hideous creation that stood before her. The horrific work of art staring at her from the canvas, a twisted mockery of her features, a reflection of the stallion who painted it. Her story finished. Octavia took a long sip from her glass. "That's the story," she said. I'm sure you can figure out the rest. She felt no remorse over keeping her guests for so long. The speculated mayor had come here seeking for a piece of her collection. Each piece had its own story, its own history that Octavia superimposed much of her own. Octavia was attached to all of her treasures, but the painting was special. A part of her wished to be with it. It wished to surrender to its aspected mayor. But another part of her felt bizarre, sort of attachment to the piece it had been made for her. Octavia would not be parting with it anytime soon. As Ironbrush promised, this painting was a masterpiece. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.